Great to have you joining me this morning as we're looking at this question: what can we learn in hard times? It's been interesting going through as we've been going through this, taking a look at how in the new church and with Emmanuel Swedenborg's commentary on the Bible, some of the different ways in which he sets it up, and he's consistently setting it up to remember the point of life is joy, and remember there are hard times and there are good things that come out of that. Now, I want to be super careful as I sort of pre-stage what we're going to talk about today. Real important to remember: God never tests people. Period. Doesn't do it. God is love. God is not about that. It's just like you with if you have children, we're not out to test our children. At least we shouldn't be. That's not our job as parents. And God doesn't do that either. And what happens is life is imperfect. And because life is imperfect, hard things happen. There are health issues, relationship issues, all kinds of issues that occur. And it's not that God gives us those to think, okay, now I want you to learn. So I'm going to give you this really hard test so that you learn. What happens is that those really hard things do happen. And God, out of God's grace and out of God's love, out of God's providence, pulls those things that are important for us to know, and those learnings, as it were. It's this idea that in God's economy, nothing is wasted. But please don't ever think that God never gives people more than they can handle, or say that to someone, or say, well, God must have absolutely a clear plan here. Not always true. There's been lots of situations where I've been as a pastor, and they're frighteningly hard for people. And the idea that God is kind of inflicting that kind of pain on people so that they learn a lesson, I can't buy that, and I don't. That's not supported by New Church theology. What is supported by Christian New Church theology is that, like, there are really hard things, and within those really hard things, there is this redemptive love of God that's always seeking to pull the best possible thing out of the challenges we have in our life, and we see that a little bit today in what we're going to read. Now, again, what's interesting, and this is me kind of taking a step back, is seeing we're about to go into the flood here. And again, Emmanuel Swedenborg is spending a lot of time sort of setting up the way the flood works, so that we don't get an idea of sort of this angry God who's around inflicting floods on people simply because they messed up. Evil is really its own, contains within it the seeds of its own self-punishment, its own self-defeat. So that's important to remember. And the line here, I think, is really fascinating. What it's talking about here, here's the line. From this, it seems possible to know, or rather to grasp in some measure, what lies at the heart of the Lord's mercy, wisdom, and love. So here's where he says, like, okay, so we have this big picture, and you want to know what lies in God's heart. So it's really in God's heart. What will get us there? And the two things he says in a previous sentence that will get us there, that will help us to understand that, which is interesting. And these are things of ourselves. These are not inflicted on us by God, is grief and regret. Isn't that interesting? So God's economy, if we want to hold it that way, even grief and regret around life can help us move closer to God's heart. So how does that work? Well, I know working with people, there's just relations are so hard. They're painful. They're hard. Probably all of you in here right now have a relationship that feels hard or feels stuck somehow. And I would imagine with that comes a lot of regret, grief, and a lot of regret. Like, oh, if I'd only done this, or maybe this, or why couldn't it be better? And then just grieving over that, right? Just grieving over that. Well, the question becomes like, well, what's the good news in that? Well, here's just a little piece of good news. That grief and regret, believe it or not, are byproducts of how much we love. When we really love other people, when we really care about them, when they really matter to us, of course we're going to feel a lot of grief, and of course we're going to feel a lot of regret. And the trick is, I think we don't want to stay just at that layer where just it's all grief and it's all regret. Because if we just stay there, that can quickly come out sideways with anger, it's the two islands, right? Anger or apathy. Either I'm going to be super angry and lean in, or I'm going to completely cut it all off and avoid it all. And those, I mean, maybe there are times where that can briefly be the answer. I don't think that's ever the long-term answer. But with grief and regret, can we just even take a breath and just go, okay, so there's grief and regret. Why is that? Well, that's because we harbor hope and we harbor love and we harbor this desire. And that grief and regret gets us to God's heart. And sometimes that heart feels very broken. I think God's heart feels broken, not infrequently. And and that's just part of life. That is part of life, because out of that broken heart comes an invitation into something new. Now it doesn't mean that necessarily the relationship gets solved, or that all the grief and regret goes away because the relationship, like there's a program to get that relationship totally righted. Sometimes there is, sometimes there's not. You would know that. And yet within that, again, we can have this very, very deep form of learning where we truly, truly are coming to learn at a very deep level what God's heart is. And God's heart is filled with that kind of love. And that kind of love is inevitably going to have places where it grieves. And that's why, from a Christian New Church perspective, Swedenborg has a fascinating definition of mercy, which is mercy is love grieving. And I love that, right? That it's that's where our love can grieve. And all of us have it, right, folks? I guarantee every single one of you listening to this today, tomorrow, next year, whatever continent you're watching it from, you have a place where your love is grieving. I haven't met people who don't. Maybe they're out there. I don't know. But it's just, yeah, just how do we, in a weird way, how do we welcome it? And even start to understand, okay, what are the lessons this has to teach me? What's the awarenesses that this has to give to me? And they may be actionable, they may not, but our job is to be open to that gentle spirit of God that's underneath that all. So that's the thought for today, friends, and I hope that makes some sense. And yeah, what we're going to do right now is we're going to do meditation, we're going to do prayer, we're going to do a blessing. And today I'm doing it off of my laptop so I can have my phone to look at all the comments. So if you feel like leaving a comment, please do. And what we do for those of you joining us for the first time is we look at live comments. We streamed a bunch of different platforms, but the live comments we look at come off of our Facebook live page. So with that, dear friends, let's get a little breath. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know that I. Be still and know that. Be still and know. Be still and. Be still. Be. Our Father, who art in the heavens, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as in heaven, so upon the earth. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you, bring you peace, and bring you home. Amen. All right, friends. Well, I hope everyone out there is looking forward to an absolutely marvelous, beautiful, wonderful day. Again, I'm always a big fan of Thursdays for some odd reason. I always like Thursdays, and all good. So we got a bunch of comments today. All right, so let's take a look at our commentary this morning. So Marianne writes, "Good morning. I love to know that God doesn't test us completely different from what I was taught to me in my earlier education. Who wants our love tested by our loved one?" Yeah, you know what, Marianne? Like you're so spot on, right? Like we would never. I mean, sometimes I see people, they have cancer, and like I know this is God's test, and I'm like, no. Like, would you give your kid cancer just to see how they held up? Absolutely not. And yet the world is imperfect, and stuff happens. Cancer is real, and within that, God's very gentle, loving endeavor is to continue working within that as best He can. So, I totally agree with you. It really is something that's important. Patricia, great to see you joining us. Mary writes, "Can't buy that either, that God is dividing up afflictions and doling them out judgmentally. It's salt on an open wound, and those phrases land on our brokenness." I love the way Mary says that, right? Like, be careful of the phrases that you use, how they will land on people's brokenness, because people oftentimes will feel like God is testing them, and feel like God is absent. And I just had this conversation, beautiful conversation with someone on that yesterday. And yet, from a Christian New Church perspective, Emanuel Swedenborg has this little line: God tests no one. Just that simple, which is a beautiful concept. Uh, Apathy, but that doesn't work. Yes, it's funny. It's funny, right? Right? Like apathy is not a bonus, and a lot of people are like, "Well, then I'll just won't care." Well, there's a great answer for you. I want to invite you to a cocktail party. Who wants to be around apathetic people? And that's where, again, when you see people who are really passionate about something, even if it overlaps into anger, I frankly, in my line of work, I would rather deal with somebody who was angry than someone who was apathetic. Absolutely, 100% of the time, because anger means love is still active. Apathy means they've put that bad boy away. Sharon writes, "Good morning. Thank you for this comforting message." And you are welcome, my friend. And if your ears were ringing, it's because my sister and I were chatting about you and talking about what a wonderful person you are. Mary writes, "We welcome that grieving together. Nothing like a kind, loving listener." And it's true, right? And that idea I think that's a role God can play too, right? That idea, as Mary said, we welcome that grieving together. I think that grieving together is so much what God is asking us to do. And it's, again, like, look at the Easter story. I mean, it's filled. I mean, the Easter story, really, say this a lot, but it really, for good reason, was the story for the original Christians, because it's so true. Gene is joining us. Great to see you there, Gene. Shannon, thank you for joining us as well. Linda writes, "Never believed in a punishing God. Bad things happen because of many reasons, sometimes because of our free will and the free will of others. God is always with us in a loving way." And that's it. And of course, if you're going to be a loving person, of course you're going to feel grief and regret. And that just is part of the game. It's part of this thing we call humanity and our human experience. So, friends, thank you so much for joining me. Boy, it's great to see your comments and have a little chance for further the conversation a little bit. And God bless you. And we will see you all tomorrow for our last one of the week. Bye-bye.